Shalom. Welcome. This is Beth, Yeshua, Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. I'm Rabbi Scott, and this is our midweek Torah study. We do these from our home. Welcome to our home. And we record these and upload these for your use. We enjoy this, but we enjoy it even more when we get some interaction going. So if you have any comments or questions or discussion, please email that to me. You'll find my email address in the description of the video below. Another comment that I have, if you'd like to join us for services, we are open for in-person services. Would love to fellowship and worship with you. Please join us. You can find information on the internet, or you can give me a call if you have any questions or thoughts on that. But we would love to see you. So. And the last thing I would say is, of course, always thank you for all of you who support this ministry. We're just very, very grateful for that, and grateful for those who partner with us, and we can partner with them in the work of the kingdom and the gospel of Yeshua on the earth during these days. It's just a great delight. I pray that this is a blessing to you. Let us get started without any further delay. This week is Parshat 47. Re'eh, see is what that means. This is in Devarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 11, verse 26, going through chapter 16. Begin with a summary. Moses presents to the nation of Israel the blessing of a spiritually centered life and the curse of becoming disconnected from Adonai. When the nation enters the land of Israel, they must burn down any trees that have been used for idol worship, introducing the animosity that they are to express and exercise against paganism and idol worship. They are to destroy all the trees and destroy all the idolatrous statues. Adonai will choose a place where the divine presence will dwell. It will be one place. Hamakom, it says, the place. Offerings may be brought there, not to private altars. Moses repeatedly warns against eating animal blood. In the desert, all meat was slaughtered in the Mishkan, but in Eretz Israel, meat may be slaughtered anywhere. The categories of foods that may be eaten are listed by Moses. He warns the nation against copying the ways of other nations. And since the Torah is complete and perfect, nothing should be added or subtracted from it. If a false prophet tells the people permanently to abandon a Torah law, which is again this juxtaposition between not adding to or subtracting from the Torah and then the false prophets, is fascinating. A false prophet is, if a false prophet tells you to abandon Torah or to indulge in idol worship, he is to be put to death. One who entices others to worship idols is to be put to death. A city of idolatry must be razed. It is prohibited to worship idols. It is prohibited to show excessive signs of mourning and weeping. It is prohibited to mark the skin or make a bald spot. Moses reiterates the classifications of kosher and non-kosher food, the prohibition of meat and milk. Produce of the second tithe must be eaten in Jerusalem. Well, the place that is going to be appointed. If the amount is too large to carry, it may be exchanged for money, which would then be brought to the place. In certain years, this tithe is given to the poor. The children of Israel are instructed to always be open-hearted, and in the seventh year, any loans must be discounted. So we've got the principle of the Jubilee year. Hashem Adonai will bless the person in all ways. A Jewish bondsman is released after 6 years, must be sent away with generous provisions. If he refuses to leave, his ear is pierced with an awl at the doorpost. He remains a bondsman until the Jubilee year. The Parshat ends with a description of the three pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Okay, this is provided by Or Sameach. You can find their summary is provided by Or Sameach. You can find their teaching materials on the internet in various places, and I encourage you to use a summary and use all available tools and studies to help us get our minds opened up to all the meanings in the Torah. I'd like to spend some time tonight on chapter 12, this idea of many places of worship. Rather, you are not to worship Adonai this way in many places of worship, Rather, you are to come to the place where Adonai your God will put his name, which is where he will live, and go there. Again, in the Hebrew, Hamakom asher yivchar Adonai Elohechem, lasum et shemosham, leshicho tidreshu uvata shema. The literal translation is more the place where Adonai Elohim, out of all your tribes, establishes his name there. His dwelling place shall you seek, you shall go there. It says again, verse 10, when you cross the Yarden and live in the land of Adonai, that your God is having you inherit, then you will bring all that I am ordering you to the place Adonai your God chooses to have his name live. Just a short distraction here at this point. If you do a study on the connections between this passage and the Akedah, the passage of the sacrifice of Isaac, or the bearing of Isaac to the sacrifice, in both places you begin with this statement that Adonai will show you. Adonai asks Abraham in the morning to take his son and go to the place I will show you, and sacrifice him there. And here it is again, the place I will show you, the place where God chooses to have his name live. It's a place that's going to be shown to them. It hasn't been shown to them yet, but it's going to be shown to them. You start with that and you begin to study out this chapter and the Akedah. You find some interesting parallels, and so there's some good discussion to have along those lines. In the Hebrew, Vehaya Hamakom, the place, Asher Yivchar, where it is chosen, Adonai Elohechem, Bo in Lashachan, from the Mishchan, Lashachan, from the root Shachar. Shimosham, there, Shema, there, Tavi'u, shall bring at Kol Asher, all, Anochi, all that I command you, Mitzaveh from Mitzvot, Edchem, Elotechem, Echem, Olotechem. This Olotechem here in this verse is, the root is the Olah. This is the offering. Shall bring the offering. Viziv, Vetziv, Chechem, Metzrotechem, the Mazer, the tithe. Utrumat, the wave offerings. Yachem, Yad, Yachem, the hand. V'chol mivchar, the choice best nidrechem, the choice best of your vows. Asher tidru, again from the root nadar, vows to Adonai. So in the English you would say, then you will bring all that I am ordering you to the place Adonai your God chooses to have his name live. Vehaya hamakom asher yivchar Adonai Elohechem Bo leshachen shemosham shema tavi'u et kol asher nanochi matzaveh et chem olotechem v'tziv chechem matzortechem utromat yadchem v'chol mivchar nidrechem asher tiru la'Adonai. There will be a place where it's chosen, Adonai Elohechem causes his name to dwell, and there you shall bring your offerings. It says, be careful with your burnt offerings. Verse 14, do it in the place Adonai will choose in one of your tribal territories. There is where you to offer your burnt offerings, and do everything I order you to do. So again, we've got these instructions that there's something powerfully significant. Verse 21, if the place which Adonai your God chooses to place his name, or causes to place his name to dwell, in the Hebrew, ki yirchach mimecha hamakom asher yivechar Adonai Elohecha lasum shemosham. So this is the essence of it. A place has been set aside for Adonai to cause his name to dwell. In the English, we have this word. It's a Hebrew word, but it has taken on an English meaning. Shekhinah, or some people pronounce it the Shekinah. It is the glory presence of Adonai, the Hakavod, kavod, the presence, the holiness. The place has been made holy Why has it been made holy? Because Adonai has made something holy in his land. What do we make holy? Do we make something holy? Um, we're not to worship at other places. This is important. Verse 2, you must destroy all the places where the nations you are dispossessing served their gods, whether on high mountains, on hills, or under some leafy tree. Break down their altars, smash their standing stones to pieces, burn up their sacred poles completely, and cut down the carved images of their gods. Exterminate their name from that place. We must bring our sacrifices and offerings to Adonai at the place where he causes his name to dwell, because that has been set aside, made holy. He has set aside a place in his land to receive us and to have communion worship there. So how do we respond to this? What is our response? This is how I see it. We set aside something in our hearts to make holy. We set aside something in our body. How do we make our body holy? The way the temple was made holy, by making our diet holy, by making it separate from the way the nations do it. In the same way that certain foods were brought, and only the unblemished foods and only the clean foods were brought into the Mishkan, or into the temple or the tabernacle. In the same way, I bring foods into my body. And if there are clean foods and unclean foods, then why wouldn't I bring clean foods into my body? Adonai has given us instructions. Our dietary laws make us holy. They make our bodies holy because we have set aside and created a place for him to cause his name to dwell, and we bring a certain kind of food into that place. This is our calling to holiness, that Adonai makes us holy as he is holy by our obedience. Chapter 14, we have this statement at the end of chapter 14, you are all children of Adonai. This is all the more important as we are in one of the gaps of history without a temple. This is the time of the exile, or the time of the diaspora. We do not have a temple, and so okay, I'm back online. All right, thank you for your patience. Had a little bit of a technical snafu there. Hopefully you're still with us. I may be able to edit that out, but I may not be able to edit that out, depending on how this is streaming or set up. So we'll just have to see how it goes. Let's see. I think what I was talking about is how we're in one of those gaps in history, in the history of humanity, when Adonai does not have a temple on the earth. And I think that we need to connect ourselves to that. Certainly there was no temple prior to Sinai, and then and so that people functioned in worship to Adonai in a certain way, and then we had the Mishkan, and then we had a gap where the people didn't keep the Mishkan, they didn't keep the sacrifices, and then we had the construction of the temple. And then we had the corruption after Solomon and so forth, and the temple fell into occasional use, I think. Then the exiles, the temple was destroyed. The exiles, they rebuilt the temple, and then we have a good period of time when the temple is functioning, again with corruption and difficulties. But By the time we get to the time of Yeshua, the temple's been operational and functional for many years, and it lasts up until 70 A.D., and the temple's destroyed, and we're going ahead with one of the gaps in human history without a temple again. And so our current status without a temple is just one of the moments in history when we don't have a temple. And for me, the earth needs a temple because the temple, or the Mishkan, the temple, was the place where Adonai caused his name to dwell. And I understand the especially Christian doctrinal position that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit by virtue of salvation in Yeshua. And I understand that, and I think there's some validity to that, absolutely. But our body was the temple of the Holy Spirit prior to the sacrifice of Yeshua as well. When various people were filled with the Spirit, and those who had salvation in Yeshua had the Spirit, and so on and so forth. So any measure of residence of the Spirit in this body, I would have to conclude that we are not the first generation to have experienced that there was something akin to that experienced by the Jews. But that's my personal doctrinal sort of position on that, such that the idea that I am filled with the Spirit because I am saved by Yeshua isn't sufficient to satisfy the need of a temple on the earth. Can I say it that way? That there needs to be a temple on the earth because Adonai has to have a place to cause his name to dwell. In the same way that after creation, they needed to be a Garden of Eden. What was the Garden of Eden? The Garden of Eden was this carved out space, this holy space that was separate and other from the rest of creation, and it was the space wherein Adonai and Adam and Eve lived together, dwelt together, walked together. Adonai was walking in the garden in the cool of the day and called out to Adam because he was hiding. I mean, think about the fascination of that. Just think about the depth of that. That Adonai was the one who called out to Adam. That this one who knows all and sees all, and yet his existence in the garden was subject to the peculiarities and vagaries of Adam and Eve and their functioning relationship with him, such that when they hid, he couldn't find them. Well, I mean, he could because he's all-seeing and all-knowing, right? But do you see, in a sense, it's almost like he makes himself, and we've had this conversation around for the past little while. It's these times when it seems that the characteristics of Adonai, the attributes of Adonai, are set aside temporarily for a purpose or for a time. So fascinating things going on there. Okay, so where does that leave us? That we are here in another one of those gaps in history without a temple, just like the time of the exile and the time of the diaspora. Adonai warns them that if they go after the gods of the other pagan nations, that if they follow after other gods, the land will vomit them out. From Leviticus 18, Vayikra, do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, because of all the nations which I am expelling ahead of you are defiled with them. The land has become unclean, and this is why I'm punishing it. The land itself will vomit out its inhabitants. So there's a sense in which the sin has caused the land to become sick. We saw this in its ultimate expression before the flood, when man was so wicked he had to be destroyed, but the earth became corrupt and evil, and the earth had to be destroyed. And one way of reading that passage is that the earth had become corrupt by virtue of the sin of mankind, and the earth needed to be destroyed, and since there's no earth for anybody to live on, the people are going to be destroyed by default. So here we have kind of a similarity to that. But you are to keep my laws and rulings and not engage in any of these practices, and so on. And then even on the moment of entering the land, we have this from Devarim chapter 13, Adonai your God is testing you in order to find out whether you really do love Adonai your God with all your heart and all your being. You are to follow Adonai your God, fear him, obey his mitzvot, his commandments, listen to what he says, serve him, and cling to him. What does it mean as the Gentiles say, what is in the heart is what counts? Yet my home is the reflection of the holiness of my marriage and my family. If you are a guest in my home and you pay attention, you will quickly see how I treat my wife and my children. What does it mean when the Gentiles say it's not what goes into a man that makes him unclean, but what comes out of him? This is the message of Yeshua. Matthew chapter 15. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are very far from me. Their worship of me is useless because they teach man-made rules as if they were doctrines. Then he called the crowd to him and said, listen and understand this. What makes a person unclean is not what goes into his mouth, rather what comes out of his mouth. That is what makes him unclean. The Talmudim came to him and said, do you know that the Perishim were offended by what you said? He replied, every plant that my Father in heaven has not planted will be pulled up by the roots. Let them be. They are blind guides. When a blind man guides another blind man, both will fall into pit. Kepha said to him, explain the parable to us. So he said, don't you understand even now? This is from Matthew 15. Don't you see that anything that enters the mouth goes into the stomach and passes out into the latrine, into the toilet? Well, they didn't have toilets at that time, but they had outhouses, sanitation facilities of some kind. But what comes out of your mouth is actually coming from your heart. And that is what makes a person unclean. So we've got the food that goes in and the words that come out. For out of the heart comes forth wicked thoughts, murder, adultery, and other kinds of sexual immorality. Theft, lies, slanders. These are what really makes a person unclean. Eating without doing netilat yadayim does not make a person unclean. Netilat yadayim was a rabbinic instruction of how to wash your hands. And you had to wash them in a certain way and in a certain order at certain times in order to make you clean. Well, it wasn't clean in a sense of having washed off the dirt or being antimicrobial. It was clean as in a sense of not being sullied by the world. And so to that effect, it was largely a symbolic gesture. Quoting Isaiah, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. Luke 6, for no good tree produces bad fruit, nor does a bad tree produce good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. Then he says this, the good person, verse 45, the good person produces good things from the store of good in his heart, while the evil person produces evil things from the store of evil in his heart. For his mouth speaks what overflows from his heart. Which brings us back to Micah 6, which we've talked about before. He has shown thee. This is the place where he gives us the kind of what's important, what he wants us to focus on. So this is the place. So that kind of concludes that sort of line of thought that you have a sense of obedience, and this obedience is a direct reflection of holiness, making yourself holy, making your life holy, and this holiness needs to have its authorship in the heart, and it will directly reflect the goodness of the person, is kind of what's happening here, what's being summarized here. And then you make the full circle back to Micah 6. He has shown thee, O man, what is good and what is required of you, to love justice and to do mercy, or to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk with humility before Adonai. All right. So back to this statement. This is the place where Adonai was going to cause his name to dwell. If this is the place, that is the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, if this is the place, Jerusalem, where Adonai caused his name to dwell, then what happened? What happened? Where did he go? In Ezekiel, we have the vision of the wheels within wheels with the cheruvim. The cheruvim, I believe, in this passage symbolize the believing remnant of Israel. Verse 10 from Ezekiel, chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 1. Then I looked, and suddenly on the dome over the heads of the cheruvim there appeared above them something like sapphire. Again, we have this reference to sapphire, which we saw when the elders went up on Sinai and had a meal, and they saw the floor of the temple room, and it was like sapphire glass. There's something like sapphire that seemed to take the form of a throne. He spoke to the man clothed in linen. He said, "Go in between the wheels of the cherubim, fill both your hands with fiery coals from between the cherubim, and throw them on the city." As I watched, he went. Now the cherubim were standing to the right of the house when the man entered, and the cloud filled the inner courtyard. All right, so what do we know of a cloud when we're dealing with the house? If this is the house, it's probably the house of Adonai, which would be the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. But so this is the house, and we've got the cloud. And it says this, verse 4, the glory of Adonai, that is his Shekhinah, that is his glory presence, the glory of Adonai rose from above the keruv. Where were the keruv? The keruv were the two angelic beings that faced the center, that created a throne on the ark that was the seat where Adonai would sit. The glory of Adonai rose from above the keruv to the threshold of the house, leaving the house filled with the cloud and the courtyard full of the brilliance of Adonai's glory. So it rose, so it was sitting down, and it rose, which gives you the sense that it's leaving the sound, but it's still in the threshold of the courtyard, the threshold of the house. So then it says, and go down to verse 18. Now the glory of Adonai left the threshold of the house and halted above the cherubim. The cherubim lifted their wings, rose off the earth. I was watching as they went off with the wheels next to them. So he leaves the threshold of the house, goes above the cherubim. The cherubim lift their wings, and they rise up. They paused, from 19, they paused at the entrance to the east gate of Adonai's house, with the glory of the God of Israel over them from above. So what you have is the glory of Adonai leaving the threshold and going above the cherubim, as if that's now a heavenly throne, and the cherubim are rising on their wings, and they're going over, and it says that they paused at the entrance to the east gate. Okay. Verse 11, then a spirit lifted me up and brought me to the east gates of Adonai's house, the gate that faces eastward. Skip down to verse 22. The cherubim lifted their wings, and with the glory of the God of Israel over them above, next the glory of Adonai rose from within the city and stood over the mountain which is on the east side of the city. And I believe that's the Mount of Olives. Then a spirit lifted me up and brought me by the vision by the Spirit of Adonai to the exiles in the land of Kasdim, after which the vision I had seen left me. So we have here the anatomy of a departure. And yes, in the truest sense of it, there is at some point within the corruption history a point at which the Shekhinah, the glory presence of Adonai, leaves the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. Adonai departed the temple because the people had departed Adonai. This is an anatomy of a people who have departed Adonai, who have left Adonai. From Daniel 1, let me look at it this. Let me say it this way. So, what does it look like when people leave Adonai? If Adonai departed the temple because the people had departed Adonai, what does that look like when people depart Adonai? Daniel chapter 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem, besieged it. God gave King Jehoiakim of Judah into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. So Nebuchadnezzar is going to carry off some of the vessels, some of the utensils, pots and pans, etc., for the house, for the temple. Skipping down, the other thing that they took was verse 4, youths without any defect, handsome, proficient in all wisdom, knowledgeable, intelligent, capable of serving in the king's palace. So these children were taking. And we've got a list of them. Let's see where we go from here. This is quoting not Daniel, this is quoting Isaiah chapter 39. Says this, the day will come when everything in your palace along with everything your ancestors stored up until today will be carried off to Babel. Nothing will be left, says Adonai. They will carry off some of your descendants, your own offspring. They'll be made eunuchs serving in the palace of the king of Babel. So this is seemingly a reference to these youths that were taken from Israel. We have Umi benecha, your children to be made eunuchs. The first thing that is carried away by the enemy and placed into the storehouses and treasuries and temples of the world is our treasures. So we're talking about the anatomy of a people. What does it look like when a people depart Adonai? The first thing that goes is the treasures. The first thing that is carried away by the enemy and placed into his storehouses, into the treasuries and temples of the world. First thing is our treasures, including our children. The second thing to be taken is our strength. Look at 2 Kings chapter 24. Joachim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 3 months. His mother's name was Nehushta, daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem, but he did what was evil in Adonai's eyes, like all his father had done. And at that time, King Nebuchadnezzar comes back onto the scene. They marched against Jerusalem. The city fell under siege. And then King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon himself arrived at the city while the troops were besieging it. And then he conquered them, and he exiled all Jerusalem, all the captains, all the mighty men of valor, all the craftsmen and the smiths, 10,000 exiles. No one was left except the poorest of the poor of the land. And lastly, in this anatomy, this discussion of what happens when a people abandon Adonai, our poverty, our orphans, the desolate are allowed to linger in the land as a reminder and a curse. This commentary regarding this discussion of Daniel 1, this commentary is by Dr. Spence. Let's see if I've got a reference to the book that he wrote. I may not have it here. I'm sorry. But it is Dr. Spence who did the commentary on this. So what does this represent? First of all, the first thing that we lose is our treasures, the loss of our heart. Remember your first love and do the things you did at first. The treasures are our heart. Where your treasure is, there your heart is also. The second thing that was lost was strength. Our strength is in the word of Adonai. That is our ultimate strength. Finally, our structures, the very temples themselves, are destroyed in this sort of in this analysis of what happens. What does it look like when a people abandon Adonai? Our strength is in the word of Adonai. Our structures, the very temples themselves, the synagogues, we are allowed to linger in case we would revive ourselves again, that Adonai would turn and have mercy. I believe this is the suspension of the kingdom of Adonai today, waiting for things to happen. Most people are waiting for the next step in the vast historical timeline of humanity. But I would suggest to you that we are allowed to linger so that we can learn this revival. We can learn this glory presence that we can interact with, at least in some capacity. But we're allowed to linger here in case we would revive ourselves again, that Adonai would turn and have mercy on us. Then the revival of our obedience would come along with our love, that we would truly love Adonai. Finally, to conclude from Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 11, therefore you are to love Adonai your God and always obey his commission, regulations, rulings, and mitzvot. Today it is you I'm addressing, not your children, who haven't known or experienced the discipline of Adonai your God, his greatness, his strong hand. We are also, this generation today, we are also a people who have not known the wonders of Adonai in those days. We have not known the splendor of the temple, the Shekinah of his presence, the emerald throne that the elders saw. But we are also preparing to go in and take the land. Yeshua is on the border of this age, the end of days, and we will also go in with him when he goes in to take the land. So we are preparing to take the land even now. We are receiving this exhortation from Moses to know him and his ways, to learn to love him through his commandments, to learn to love him through all of his instructions, that we might be a holy and prepared people. The same as Bnei Israel on the bank of the Jordan, preparing to go in to the land. And that is the summary of our lives, a preparation to enter into the fullness of Adonai in his land, in his kingdom, his eternal, unending kingdom, his heavenly realm. Okay, that concludes our study for tonight. Thank you all for joining me. If you have any questions, I'll make a note of my email address, and you're welcome to reach out to me. In the meantime, may Adonai bless you and keep you and give you a good week. Thank you, and good night.